And now, under this blue sky, we could meet and I could see your smile. My heart cried, I couldn't hold back.
This is the story of a failed hero who became a lord. Two beautiful elves and two stunning werebeasts approached a young boy, their eyes filled with anticipation. Observing him with unwavering focus, they declared with seriousness that this boy's recent display of skill proved his worth. They stated with certainty that he was destined to become their lord. The boy, hearing this from complete strangers in a race entirely different from his own, felt a wave of confusion. He apologized, explaining to the two women that they must have mistaken him for someone else. Their eyes widened in shock at his response. They exchanged glances, horrified and puzzled, questioning each other about the boy's denial. Laughter soon broke the tense atmosphere as they burst into loud, melodic laughter, their voices ringing out with unrestrained joy. Turning back to the boy with bright smiles that made their delicate faces flush with color, they insisted that they were not mistaken. They affirmed with unwavering confidence that this boy was indeed their lord, speaking with such resolute conviction that not a trace of doubt could be found in their tone or expressions. Clenching their fists in excitement, they repeated their declaration, their enthusiasm unshaken. The boy, unnerved by their persistence and fervor, began to panic. Their fanatic behavior made him uneasy, and he concluded that the best course of action was to flee. Without another thought, he dashed away from the two elf girls, hoping to escape the surreal and increasingly uncomfortable situation. The two elves, seeing him run, immediately gave chase. Their speed was extraordinary, and they caught up with him in no time. One of them wrapped her arms around his waist, her face alight with excitement as though she were playing a delightful game. The other leapt up and grabbed his head, giggling as she insisted that they would not let go until he accepted their claim. Their cheerful yet unyielding grip on him left the boy flustered and desperate to escape their grasp. The boy shouted in alarm, his voice echoing with a mixture of shock and nervousness. He pleaded with them not to force him into becoming their lord, his tone filled with urgency and discomfort. But the two elf girls were relentless, calling him by the title "Milord" with an almost reverent tone. Their unwavering determination only added to his frustration as he struggled against their hold, desperate to free himself from the awkward and bewildering encounter. This peculiar tale revolves around a boy named Seiji, who suddenly found himself entangled with the elves and recognized as their overlord. What led to this unexpected turn of events remains to be seen, but the story unfolds with a glimpse into his life before this strange situation arose. A lady was seen closing her eyes and expressing regret to Seiji, explaining that her interest lay only in strong individuals. This moment marked the shattering of Seiji's heart after he had bravely confessed his feelings to her. The onlookers present during his confession were visibly taken aback. Their shocked expressions painted the scene, with some covering their mouths in disbelief and others nervously glancing away, their faces damp with beads of cold sweat. Muted whispers filled the room as they marveled at Seiji's boldness in approaching the guild receptionist, whose name was Fian. Despite their astonishment, they couldn't help but pity him for the blatant rejection he had just endured. Seiji left the room, his heart heavy and broken. His shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of rejection, and a tinge of sadness clouded his face. With a bag hanging loosely on his shoulder, he walked away from the place where his vulnerability had been laid bare. In his mind, he reflected on the encounter, labeling himself a humble adventurer who had been dismissed by the guild's receptionist, Fian. Seiji was heartbroken and confused as he made his way back to his hometown. He could not understand why he had been rejected, despite his best efforts. Fianna, the adventurer who had recently turned him down, claimed his skills were unsuitable for combat. While he could not blame her for her opinion, it still hurt. His job type was house husband, and his abilities were mainly for support. One of his skills allowed him to clean and disinfect wounds instantly, which he had often used to assist other adventurers. Stretching out his palms toward them, their wounds would be cleansed, and they would feel refreshed. Despite this ability, he knew it was ordinary magic, useful but not impressive in combat. As he walked back to his hometown, Seiji reflected on his life as an adventurer. He admitted to himself that being an adventurer was rewarding in its own way, but perhaps it was time to consider his future. The thought of returning to the countryside and taking over the family farm crossed his mind. These thoughts occupied him as he reached a junction in the road. A wooden signboard stood there, pointing in various directions with names carved into it. Seiji pulled out his map to confirm his route, glancing around the area. He noticed a shortcut through the Great Lost Forest, which could save him time, but he also remembered the strong monsters rumored to inhabit it. Deciding that safety was more important than speed, he chose to stick to the longer route and continued his journey. As Seiji walked along the path, he spotted two figures lying in the middle of the road. They appeared unconscious, their forms motionless. Alarmed, he quickened his pace, fearing for their lives. Although he had no idea who these people were, their plight tugged at his sense of responsibility. Their identities were hidden beneath long cloaks, adding an air of mystery to the scene. When he reached them, he noticed their long ears and strikingly beautiful faces. The sight left him momentarily stunned, his jaw dropping in shock. He shook his head, slapped his cheeks, and muttered under his breath to snap himself out of his daze, berating himself for being distracted by their beauty. Looking closely, Seiji observed that the two individuals showed no signs of physical injury. Their skin was flawless, and their garments were intact. He found it hard to believe they had been attacked by monsters, as there were no bruises or signs of a struggle. The situation puzzled him further, as it did not resemble a bandit attack or any typical roadside trap. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of what had happened. He stroked his chin and stared at them with spiraling confusion in his eyes. These were elves, a race known for their pride and dignity. He hesitated, wondering if helping them might lead to trouble. Touching their garments without permission could offend them, and he knew how delicate matters involving elves could be. Despite his concerns, Seiji could not ignore the sight of two unconscious individuals lying helplessly before him. He squatted beside them, gently shaking their shoulders to see if they would respond. Slowly, they began to stir, their voices faint and trembling as they murmured their condition. They were starving and weak, barely able to speak. Hearing this, Seiji was shocked to realize that their collapse was due to extreme hunger. Their exhaustion had pushed them to the brink of unconsciousness, their bodies so frail that even their stomachs emitted loud growls. He sat beside them, feeling a mix of surprise and concern at how such regal beings had been reduced to this state. He brought out delicious sandwiches for them, which they collected with excitement, their faces flushed with joy. They opened their mouths wide to bite into the meal, consuming it in no time while looking incredibly happy. Once they finished eating, their faces lit up with bright smiles as they expressed gratitude, commenting that the kindness shown by the boy was something they would never forget. Their words carried deep appreciation, and their flushed faces reflected their genuine feelings as they thanked him, calling him their savior. The boy, smiling warmly, replied that they got fortunate because they were hungry, standing up with a cheerful wave as he prepared to leave. One of the girls, looking downcast, mentioned that they accidentally ate a large portion of his food, while the other girl, equally concerned, asked if their actions had inconvenienced him. The boy reassured them that it was not a big deal, calmly explaining that he possessed a special skill called eco-bag. He pointed out that he carried no visible luggage, surprising the girls with this casual revelation. Their faces turned pale with shock as they whispered to each other, confirming whether they had heard him correctly. The first girl nodded, her expression shifting to one of amazement, while the other girl's excitement was visible in her glowing eyes and flushed cheeks. The boy, seemingly unbothered, elaborated that other adventurers often use something called magic pockets, which performed a similar function. He scratched his head thoughtfully, casually noting that he was unsure why the two skills had different names. As he pondered this, his gaze drifted into blank space, as though trying to unravel the mystery. When he turned back to the girls, he noticed their heightened excitement. They whispered more fervently, asking each other if the boy had indeed mentioned the eco-bag. Both agreed, and their expressions reflected a mix of astonishment and enthusiasm, their faces turning red as they grew more animated. One of the girls introduced herself as Aina Rindu, placing a hand over her chest as a gesture of respect and asking the boy to call her Aina. Her smile was bright, and her face glowed with a blush as she addressed him with the title, Milord. The other girl followed suit, introducing herself as Yuffie Rose and asking him to call her Yuffie. She, too, placed a hand on her chest and cheerfully used the title, Milord, her demeanor matching Aina's. The boy was visibly startled by this sudden change in their behavior, wondering why these two strange girls were addressing him with such a formal title. He hesitantly asked what they meant by Lord, clarifying that his name was Seiji. Hearing his name, The girls' shock and excitement seemed to intensify. Their eyes widened, and their mouths fell open in astonishment, their faces growing even redder. They repeated his name softly, saying it aligned with what they were thinking. Seiji, confused by their reaction, found himself at a loss, unable to understand why these strangers were treating him with such reverence. Meanwhile, the two girls quietly reflected on the situation, convinced in their minds that this boy was who they thought he might be after hearing about his eco-bag skill. Seiji's thoughts drifted for a moment, as if recalling something significant. His expression shifted slightly, showing a mix of surprise and realization, which caught the girls' attention. They immediately asked him if something was wrong, their voices filled with concern. One of the girls, her face turning a deep shade of red, nervously exclaimed that their lord was standing too close to them, her demeanor betraying a mix of nervousness and awe. The boy, completely bewildered, turned to the two elf girls trying to make sense of the situation. They kept addressing him with a reverent tone and calling him Lord, which left him perplexed. He asked them what they meant, attempting to calm them down by requesting that they stand still for a moment. Their fidgety behavior was making it harder for him to think. He then stretched out his hands toward them, noting how their clothes were covered in dirt and grime. Without hesitation, he activated his magic, using a cleaning spell known as the washing technique, and another purifying spell to enhance the results. As a bright light enveloped the two elf girls, they stood frozen, their wide eyes reflecting a mix of awe and disbelief. When the light faded, the girls were stunned to see their previously filthy clothes now spotless and appearing brand new. Their faces flushed slightly as they examined themselves, exclaiming about the disappearance of the dirt and the refreshed state of their attire. The boy, observing their reaction, couldn't understand their excitement. The girls, overwhelmed with curiosity, asked if this magic he used was an ancient art. He casually replied that it was nothing special, internally puzzled as to why they called it ancient magic. To him, this was just an everyday spell, something anyone could do. Yet, the elf girls vehemently protested his dismissal of its significance, waving their hands dramatically like children throwing a tantrum. They insisted that his magic was incredible, noting how it not only removed the dirt, but also made their clothes look like they had just been tailored. Their sparkling eyes and excitement were matched by the now clean, radiant appearance of their garments. They concluded, with absolute certainty, that he must be from the hero bloodline. The boy, whose name was Seiji, could barely process their claim. He believed these two elf girls were completely delusional. He told them that they had been saying strange things ever since they regained consciousness, and their current claim only reinforced that belief. Firmly but politely, he informed them that his role was simply that of a house husband, not some heroic figure they imagined. The elf girls appeared utterly shocked at this revelation, their eyes and mouths wide open, as they repeated the words, house husband, in disbelief. They found the concept both baffling and unique, yet their minds refused to let go of their earlier assumption. In their hearts, they felt certain that Seiji was the person they were looking for. Despite his humble self-description, his abilities convinced them otherwise. They silently resolved that their first impression of him was correct. Seiji, meanwhile, felt a chill run down his spine, sensing that this situation was only growing more complicated. He decided it was best to leave before things escalated further. Turning away from the two girls, he announced that he was heading toward the capital, pointing in the opposite direction as he prepared to walk away. Before he could take more than a few steps, the elf girls hurried after him, pleading with him to wait. They moved closer, their glowing eyes filled with a mix of determination and charm, making them look almost endearing. They asked if they could inquire about something important. Standing there, they earnestly requested that he become their lord. Seiji, taken aback by the boldness of their request, declined firmly but politely. His expression grew more resolute as he told them they must have mistaken him for someone else. The girls, however, refused to believe they were wrong. Their voices rose as they declared with unwavering certainty that he was the one destined for the role. Seiji felt exasperated and overwhelmed by their insistence. He could hardly grasp how he had ended up in this strange situation where two elf girls were trying to force him into a role he had no interest in. Despite his repeated denials, they remained convinced of their belief, leaving him in a predicament he had no idea how to escape. Sitting down to catch his breath, Seiji found himself listening reluctantly as the two elf girls began talking about the prophecy of their village. Without any coercion, they knelt before him, their gestures reflecting genuine reverence and sincerity. They seemed determined to involve him in their tale. Curiosity getting the better of him, he asked what the prophecy entailed, wondering if it could provide any clues about their behavior. The two elf girls responded affirmatively, explaining that the prophecy foretold that when the descendant of their elven lord, the hero, appeared in the royal capital, they must welcome him as the king of their clan. Seiji listened to them with growing disbelief, trying to grasp the situation. He addressed them calmly, stating that he understood why they had mistaken him for their king. His intent was to defuse the misunderstanding and get these two elf girls off his back. He explained to them that they had the wrong person, but despite his clarification, they continued addressing him with the title of Milord. Curious and slightly exasperated, Seiji asked the two girls if they had any evidence to support their claims. They confidently replied that the eco-bag skill was unique to the hero, and that only the hero possessed ancient magic with distinctive abilities. To reinforce their point, they added that he matched the description of Seiji, a man with black eyes and black hair. Hearing this, Seiji was stunned. He subconsciously touched his own silky black hair, reflecting on how his appearance was indeed somewhat rare. Still, he wondered aloud why his name seemed to carry so much significance, noting that it was written in something called kanji. The two elf girls were visibly shocked upon hearing this, exclaiming in disbelief at his apparent knowledge. Seiji realized he had unintentionally revealed too much and quickly shouted an oops under his breath, covering his mouth with his palm to avoid digging himself into deeper trouble. The elf girls, now slightly upset, explained that kanji was a script passed down within the hero's lineage. They added that it was said only a legendary hero summoned in ancient times could use it. Folding their hands as if in prayer, the two girls pleaded with Seiji, suggesting that he could better understand the situation if he came to their village to read an ancient book about the hero. They explained that only those with the hero's blood could read and understand the ancient text. Their plea turned more enthusiastic as they declared that this was precisely why they needed him to come with them to the village. Addressing him once again as their lord, they asked if he would accompany them. Seiji, even after hearing their detailed explanation, declined their offer. The two elf girls exchanged glances, clearly sensing that something was not right. Putting on puppy-like expressions, they tried to charm him, their eyes wide and pleading, asking if their lord would not at least follow them to their village. Their tactic worked, and Seiji, unable to resist, became visibly excited. He shouted eagerly that they should get going to the elf village already to read those ancient books. The girls, now wearing bright smiles, agreed, saying that they should indeed get going. They added that their elf village was located deep within the great forest. Hearing this, Seiji hesitated for a moment, asking them to hold on. He wanted to confirm if their village was really in the great lost forest, commenting that the place was notorious for being filled with strong monsters. The two girls reassured him not to worry, confidently stating that they would take care of any dangerous creatures. They promised to make it worth his while, but Seiji replied firmly that he had no time to concern himself with such matters. He told them that he had his future to deal with, which left the girls visibly shocked. They asked him what he meant by his future life and whether something had happened. In response, Seiji explained what had transpired in his life so far, describing how Feina had rejected his confession and how he was now heading to his hometown to live a quiet life as a farmer. One of the elf girls, hearing this, became enraged. Her face turned red, and a vein visibly popped on her forehead as her eyes burned with fury. She burst out angrily, her voice rising to a shout, demanding to know what had just happened. She was utterly livid, questioning how someone so insignificant could dare to reject a proposal from someone like Seiji-sama. The boy watched as one of the elf girls became visibly upset, her expression darkening with anger. He could feel the tension rising between them. In his mind, he couldn't help but think that the real trash here wasn't Feina, but the elf girl standing before him. The girl, Aina, couldn't hide her frustration any longer. Her voice was sharp as she asked the boy, Seiji, what he thought of the so-called revenge, a legend passed down orally as part of Seiji-sama's story. Seiji listened carefully, his curiosity piqued by the mention of this legend. Aina, her anger palpable, continued to speak, her words full of disdain toward a woman named Dina. She suggested that it was time for Seiji to kick the crap out of the ignorant woman who had rejected him. Her tone was venomous, and it seemed as if she genuinely believed in the necessity of revenge. Yuffie, standing beside Aina, smiled faintly, commenting that it was human nature for those who rejected others to receive what they deserved. It was clear that these two girls were deeply invested in Seiji's story. Seiji, though still processing the intensity of their words, spoke calmly. He told the two girls that revenge would only bring more harm, not anything good. He had no desire to hurt anyone, not even those who had rejected him. His voice was steady as he explained that he did not want to harbor hatred for anyone, let alone exact revenge. His stance was firm, but he could sense the tension in the air as the two elf girls seemed unmoved by his reasoning. Suddenly, one of the elf girls addressed him, calling him "my lord." Her voice was filled with excitement and pleading as she urged Seiji to come with them. She promised him a reward, something that would be worth his while. Seiji, still somewhat skeptical, asked what kind of reward they were offering. The response came quickly: 500,000 gallum. The promise of such a substantial amount of money made Seiji pause. He touched his chin, deep in thought, as the mention of 500,000 gallum resonated in his mind. The two elf girls exchanged a quick glance, whispering to each other. Aina seemed confident that they were making progress. Yuffie, still smiling, whispered back, suggesting that they could recreate the legend of Seiji's confession and make the most of the situation. Seiji, now intrigued, asked if they were certain that the ancient book could be deciphered by him. Would he still receive the reward if he was unable to understand it? They assured him that if he accepted their offer and followed them to the elf village, they would make sure there were no hardships along the way. Their bright smiles were meant to convince him further. But Seiji wasn't convinced yet. He asked, with a hint of suspicion, why they had collapsed on the road earlier if they were so strong. The two girls fell silent at this question. They had no immediate response, and Seiji couldn't help but smirk at their lack of an answer. His doubts were growing, but the promise of money was undeniably tempting. He sighed loudly, his mind wrestling with the decision. Finally, he relented. There was no way he could turn down such a significant reward. The two girls, seeing that Seiji had accepted, erupted in joy. They high-fived each other, their faces glowing with excitement. Each girl grabbed one of Seiji's arms, smiling brightly and thanking him for his generosity. They couldn't help but ask each other if their lord was truly as kind as he seemed. Seiji, though still uncertain, simply nodded and told them it was time to get going. The elf girls, eager to get on their way, requested a bit of time to pack their luggage before heading to the elf village. Seiji agreed, albeit reluctantly, and watched as the two girls made their way toward the forts to gather their things. As they walked away from him, Seiji couldn't help but notice the mischievous glints in their eyes. Their faces were flushed with excitement, their expressions far too pleased for a simple journey. There was something off about the whole situation, but Seiji couldn't shake the pull of the reward money. He found himself wondering what awaited him in the elf village and whether he had made the right choice. The promise of wealth was blinding, but deep down, he had a nagging feeling that something was not as it seemed. The elf girls, now out of Seiji's immediate line of sight, exchanged whispers, their voices barely audible. Their faces were full of glee as they prepared for what was to come. Seiji, still standing by himself, was left to wonder what would truly happen to him once he followed them to the elf village. The thought of being swept away by their charm and promises of wealth made him uneasy, but the lure of riches was hard to resist. Would he be blinded by the allure of money, or would he uncover the truth behind their intentions? As Seiji stood there, lost in thought, the two elf girls continued their preparations, eager to set their plan in motion. What awaited Seiji in the village remained a mystery, but one thing was certain: his decision would lead to a journey full of uncertainty. After being rejected by Princess Feina, Seiji decided to return to his hometown. On his journey, he encountered two elves who had collapsed from starvation. Seiji, feeling a sense of responsibility, helped them. But as soon as he met and spoke with these two elf girls, they forcefully recognized him as a hero. They immediately began to worship him, calling him their lord. They vowed to keep pressuring him until he accepted their reverence. This caused Seiji to regret rescuing the two girls, who had been on the brink of death, wishing he had been more cautious about helping elves on his way back home. Fast forward to the present moment. Seiji and these two elf girls were now standing in the vast forest, facing a giant monster. One of the girls wielded a curved blade, while the other cast powerful magic, both launching attacks at the beast before them. The two girls stood with serious, stern expressions, completely unlike their previously cute and childish demeanor when they interacted with Seiji. As the curved blade hit the monster, it collapsed, its enormous body hitting the ground with a thunderous boom. Seiji was shocked. These two elves had easily defeated a monster that many others would have struggled to defeat. He marveled at how effortlessly they handled what seemed like a daunting task. The two girls stood triumphantly over the monster's corpse. With an angry look, they addressed the fallen creature, speaking as though it had committed an unforgivable offense by daring to stand before their lord. They claimed the monster's punishment would be to repent for eternity. Their tone was frightening, their words chilling, and Seiji found himself dumbfounded by their fierce attitude. Then, almost immediately, they turned back to him, their faces now adorned with cute, cheerful smiles, though there was a hint of pride in their expressions. They asked Seiji what he thought of their brave and beautiful fight, eagerly awaiting his approval. One of them boasted that even the evil dragon or demon king wouldn't pose a threat to elves like them. To them, the lowly monster they had just defeated was nothing more than trash. Seiji stood still, thinking to himself that these two girls sure talked a lot. He stared at them silently, which made them believe he was looking down on them. Seiji quickly denied it, but then commented on the ancient book from the elf village, saying that only heroes were supposed to be able to read it. He explained that, although he was taking on the role of deciphering the text, he wasn't even sure if he could understand it. One of the girls, her face lighting up with a bright smile, encouraged him not to be so humble. The other girl, her tone serious but playful, reminded him that too much humility could lead to arrogance. This remark shocked Seiji, who, in response, asked them what kind of absolute trust they had in him. He questioned them, trying to understand their expectations, asking what exactly they thought their relationship with him was. The two girls blushed, their faces flushing bright red as they smiled even more widely. They eagerly explained that Seiji-sama was an honored person, someone who had inherited the bloodline of a hero. They said that, essentially, he was their lord and the ruler of the elves. They spoke with so much confidence and excitement that Seiji almost couldn't believe it. The girls, still thrilled by their declaration, proclaimed that because of this, they would become his servants. Their happiness was evident, and they seemed overjoyed by the thought of serving him. Seiji, however, didn't share their enthusiasm. His face showed a nervous expression, and beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. He was confused, wondering what kind of situation he had found himself in. Despite his unease, the two girls continued to speak of their devotion, clearly convinced that he was their lord and they were his loyal followers. As they walked on through the forest, Seiji realized that they had been walking for quite some time now. He stopped and turned to the girls, asking them just how much further the elf village was. The two girls, smiling as they stood before Seiji, greeted him warmly. They commented on how insightful their lord was, admiring him before telling him that they had just arrived. With bright smiles on their faces, they gestured to their side, explaining that the entrance to the village lay just ahead. Seiji, slightly puzzled, looked over at the thick gathering of tree trunks that stretched across the land. The tree trunks appeared as though they formed a natural barrier, resembling the remains of ancient forts, and he questioned what they meant by calling it the entrance. As he stood there, contemplating the situation, the tree trunks seemed to shift before his eyes, warping into a narrow passage. The girls confidently stepped forward, and Seiji, though slightly hesitant, followed their lead. As they passed through the mystical portal, Seiji was immediately struck by the shift in atmosphere. He found himself in an entirely different dimension, one brimming with a brilliant light that made everything shimmer with life. In the distance, a massive castle loomed, its towering structure dominating the landscape. Seiji looked up at the grand sight and murmured to himself, acknowledging that this was indeed the legendary elf village. He found it hard to believe as the place appeared less like a village and more like a gigantic, ancient castle. The two girls, seemingly pleased by Seiji's reaction, turned and moved toward a tall elf man who had been waiting for them. He appeared to be the village chief, a figure of immense authority. The girls approached him and, with respect, informed the elf chief that Seiji was their king. The elf stepped forward, bowing low to Seiji, addressing him as his king. Seiji, feeling uncomfortable with the title, shifted uncomfortably. In his mind, he couldn't help but think that this elf man might be even more formal and rigid than the two eccentric girls who had brought him here. Despite his unease, Seiji tried to compose himself as the elf chief continued to speak. The elf informed Seiji that before deciphering the ancient book, he must first perform a ritual to unveil the sacred sword. Seiji's frustration began to grow as the pressure mounted, and the situation seemed to spiral out of control. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened so far. He looked at the elf, questioning the need for a ritual, and asked if he had just heard correctly. He demanded to know if the sword was, in fact, the sacred relic he had to retrieve. After a brief pause, Seiji told the elf to lead him to the sword, resigned to the fact that he would have to go along with this strange ritual. The elf nodded solemnly, still addressing Seiji as his king, and gestured for him to follow. They moved through the village, passing various structures and people, until they came upon a large bath area. There, two elf girls were already waiting for Seiji. With a polite but firm tone, they informed Seiji that before entering the sanctuary, he would need to be washed. Seiji, not feeling the need for such an elaborate gesture, politely declined. He reassured them that he would handle the washing himself. To his surprise, Seiji's magic activated effortlessly, surrounding him with a soft, warm glow. Soap seemed to appear out of nowhere, and he began to wash himself. The elf girls watched in astonishment as the magic enveloped him. Within moments, Seiji was bathed in a radiant light, and his body and clothes shimmered with cleanliness. He turned to the girls who had offered to help and asked if he was clean enough now. Their mouths dropped open in shock and they gasped at the sight before them. They immediately wondered if the magic Seiji had used was some form of ancient power. With wide eyes, they remarked that it was just as expected of their lord, though their reaction made Seiji feel a little nervous. A cold bead of sweat formed on his cheek, and he couldn't help but wonder how things had escalated so quickly. Feeling uneasy, Seiji was escorted further into the village, his mind filled with the overwhelming responsibilities thrust upon him. He was brought to a large altar, and the elf girls explained that the sacred sword lay upon it. Seiji, still processing the bizarre situation, asked if this meant he was supposed to pull the sword out now. The girls nodded, confirming that the sword was only meant to be removed by their lord. They explained that the sword had been protected within the sanctuary for countless years, and no one had ever managed to pull it free. Seiji, feeling the weight of the moment, inquired about the fate of those who had tried to pull the sword before him. The elf girls, Aina and Yuffie, exchanged nervous glances, their expressions shifting from calm to panic. They quickly reassured Seiji that there was no need for him to concern himself with such details. Their voices were hurried, and they urged him to focus on the task at hand. Seiji, despite their insistence, decided that he would give it a try anyway. He moved closer to the altar, where the sacred sword rested. Standing next to the altar, Seiji gazed at the sword. He observed its intricate design, its gleaming surface calling out to him. His mind wandered, and he hesitated for a moment, thinking aloud about the nature of the sword. With a skeptical look, Seiji asked if this truly was the sacred sword, or if it was merely a wooden stick masquerading as one. Aina almost fainted in shock, her body trembling with fear as a cold sheen of sweat formed on her cheeks. Her expression reflected the sheer terror evoked by the words their lord had just spoken. Yuffie, standing close to her, reached out instinctively, holding her to keep her from collapsing completely. Although Yuffie managed to compose herself, she too bore the weight of disbelief, evidenced by the cold beads of sweat glistening on her own cheeks. Their lord chastised Aina gently, cautioning her against jumping to conclusions. He reminded her, with calm authority, that the sacred sword in question was nothing more than a wooden stick in his eyes. He emphasized that its value could not be measured by individuals such as themselves, and urged Aina to compose herself and not to faint. Seiji, observing the exaggerated reactions of the two girls, sighed deeply. He told them he understood their astonishment, but assured them there was no need for such theatrics. He promised to handle the situation and requested that they calm down. As he moved toward the sheath containing the sacred sword, his demeanor was one of casual confidence. Stretching out his hand, he gripped the sword firmly and pulled it out with surprising ease. It was as if the sword offered no resistance to him. Turning to the girls, he asked if this was what they had been so astonished about, demonstrating how easily he had removed the weapon. The two elf girls erupted in loud exclamations, their voices tinged with amazement as they praised their lord for pulling the sacred sword from its sheath without a trace of effort. They were filled with admiration, marveling at how their lord could achieve such a feat without breaking a single sweat. Seiji, brushing off their over-the-top reactions, told them it was not a big deal and believed anyone could have done the same. Holding the sword close to his eyes, he remarked on how it bore a striking resemblance to his broomstick back at home. Its compact size, he thought, made it particularly convenient for cleaning small gaps around his house. Hearing this, Aina, who had just been steadied by Yuffie, collapsed to the ground in pure shock, her face pale with disbelief. Aina whispered her astonishment at the revelation, murmuring that not only did their lord already possess one of these sacred swords, but he was also casually using it for mundane tasks. Yuffie, kneeling beside her and attempting to bring her back to her senses, cautioned Aina against applying ordinary logic to their lord. She explained that Seiji was no ordinary person, going as far as to suggest that he was almost inhuman. Seiji, overhearing their dramatic remarks, gave them a dismissive look, silently wondering what nonsensical ideas these overly excitable elf girls were spouting now. However, the girls interpreted his stern expression as a rare form of reward. Smiling brightly, they rushed toward him, each clinging tightly to one of his arms. They declared that being by their lord's side was the ultimate experience and expressed their joy at his mere presence. They warned him, in their usual excitable manner, to be cautious with his casual praises, as even the slightest acknowledgement from him might cause them to faint from sheer happiness. Their faces flushed red as they made their playful remarks, their smiles brimming with admiration. Seiji, clearly unamused by their antics, responded with a simple acknowledgement, urging them to focus on deciphering the ancient book instead of indulging in unnecessary dramatics. Seiji and the two elf girls continued their journey to another chamber, illuminated by an otherworldly bright light. When they reached their destination, they were informed that they had arrived at the altar of the ancient book. One of the elf girls produced a key, carefully unlocking the safe that contained the ancient text. With great reverence, they retrieved the book and handed it to Seiji, who accepted it without much fanfare. As he took hold of the ancient artifact, he realized it was nothing more than a notebook. While tempted to comment on its underwhelming appearance, he chose to remain silent for the time being. Flipping through the pages, Seiji gave himself some space to examine the so-called ancient book, while the elf girls observed him from a respectful distance. Their anticipation was palpable, and they seemed almost breathless as they waited for their lord to uncover the secrets hidden within the text. Opening the first page, Seiji began reading the contents of the book, which addressed him in an ancient tone. The writing revealed that it was intended for the descendant of the hero, the one destined to become the next king of the elves. As Seiji read further, he noted how the writing carried a humorous undertone, making the entire scenario almost laughable. The author, evidently someone with a playful personality, had even added the modern abbreviation Elmau to emphasize the lightheartedness of the situation. Continuing through the text, the writing confirmed that if the new hero was reading this, it likely meant they were one of the descendants of the hero who had penned the book. The words on the page suggested that the new hero might be feeling confused at this very moment, leaving Seiji to process the bizarre mix of humor and gravitas in what was supposedly a sacred text. The writer of the ancient book stated that he would explain the circumstances of the new hero in the next section. He began by sincerely apologizing to the new hero for being entangled with such troublesome girls. If the new hero ever thought about escaping the chaos, the writer noted how it might feel impossible to get away from everything. He offered just one piece of advice to the new hero, urging him to give up. Seiji, reading these words in the ancient book, let out a sigh, his face reflecting a troubled expression. Despite his hesitation, he continued reading, delving deeper into the cryptic and bizarre narrative. The book revealed that by now, the new hero must have experienced the intense assumptions and quirks of the elves. The writer of the book admitted he was no warrior, just a humble house husband, entirely incapable of fighting monsters. He refrained from detailing how the elves had forced him into the role of a hero, acknowledging that he never wanted such a title. However, the writer explained that even if he had tried to run, the elves' extraordinary powers would have inevitably dragged him back. The writer then confessed that the elves, rather than any demon king, were the true source of his endless troubles. Seiji, while reading, felt a growing sense of regret as the hopelessness of the situation dawned on him. His face was coated with cold sweat, and he hid it in his hands. Frustration etched across his features. The book continued, detailing the presence of twin-like elves who were supposed to guide the new hero. The writer inquired whether this seemed right, describing the twins as princesses who both wanted to marry the hero. Adding to the confusion, he speculated they might be half-elves, asking the new hero to take care of them. The writer confessed there was another task he wanted the hero to undertake, though he assured the hero it was not compulsory. Yet the tone hinted that his words lacked any real force, as if he had no way to compel the hero to act even if he wanted to. He then implored the hero to handle the notebook carefully and to remember its contents, explaining he had written everything while cleaning yesterday with his favorite book in hand. The writer recalled how the elves had arrived during his cleaning session, asking if what he was holding could be the legendary sacred sword. After that encounter, the elves had taken away his favorite broomstick, assuming it held some mystical power. The writer described how the elves turned his notebook into one of their sacred books, even though they could not read kanji and likely misunderstood its content. He implored the new hero to inform the elves that the original writer of the book wished for its contents to remain unrevealed, and that the book itself should be destroyed. This, the writer claimed, was his most sincere wish as the one who had created the book. Seiji, upon reading this, was stunned, his expression shifting to one of nervous apprehension as he glanced over at Aina and Yuffie, who stood a few feet away. He could only wonder how he might break the news to these two eccentric girls about the writer's desire to see the book destroyed. Seiji continued to read, feeling the weight of each word. The writer acknowledged how long the content of the book had become and suggested it was time to bring it to a close. The passage concludes with the ancient text noting that while the elves had their quirks and peculiar tendencies, it left the decision of whether they were truly bad people to the new hero. The writer of the ancient book wished the new hero luck, encouraging him to stay strong in the face of the world's challenges. The book ended with the author signing his name as the hero Seiya. Seiji finished reading and found himself staring at the two elf girls, unsure of how to address them. Ayana and Yuffie, noticing his prolonged gaze, called for his attention. They asked if the ancient book contained any sinister revelations. Seiji assured them that it did not, but explained that the book's hero had requested its contents remain a secret. This revelation left both Ayana and Yuffie shocked, their jaws dropping and their eyes widening in disbelief. Yuffie voiced her suspicion that the ancient book must be a forbidden grimoire, one whose exposure could bring disaster upon the world. Seiji confirmed her theory, telling them that it would be best to burn the book to prevent any calamity. Without hesitation, Ayana and Yuffie dashed off. Ayana declared she would prepare the holy fire, and Yuffie ran to inform the other elves of their plan. Watching them sprint away in panic, Seiji sighed, wishing that the two could be normal for once. Before long, Ayana and Yuffie returned, having prepared a blazing fire in a ceremonial cup they called the Holy Fire. Using an iron rod, they placed the ancient book into the flames, reducing it to ashes before Seiji's eyes. Seiji, relieved to see the book destroyed, told the elf girls that he planned to head home. The two were stunned, chasing after him and pleading for him to stay. Addressing him with a serious tone, they insisted that his confession of revenge was not yet complete. Seiji sighed, expressing his frustration as he reminded them that he had already fulfilled his role. He reiterated that he had no interest in any revenge they were talking about, but the elf girls, undeterred, continued to insist. With bright smiles and determined looks, they told him that the confession of revenge was still pending. Seeing their pleading expressions and glowing eyes, Seiji grew increasingly nervous. He felt both frustrated and cornered, unsure if he really had to go along with this so-called confession of revenge. As he deliberated, the thought crossed his mind that if the two elf girls carried out this ritual on their own, it could create significant trouble for the guild in Fina. He knew all too well how unpredictable and irrational the two could be. Lost in thought, his hand rested on his chin as beads of cold sweat began to form on his face. Suddenly, one of the girls proposed a reward of 2 million glum to convince him to fulfill their request. Hearing the enormous sum, Seiji turned to them, his expression shifting to one of cautious curiosity. He asked for confirmation, inquiring if the confession of revenge would harm the person it targeted. They assured him it would not, adding that it was merciful for their lord to consider people who were insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Their bright red smiles unnerved Seiji, but they reassured him that his role was merely to complete a difficult quest and demonstrate his greatness. Shocked by their response, he asked if they were serious. Their unwavering affirmation left him resigned to the task. Deciding it was better to go along with their request to avoid further complications, he told himself that completing the quest would not only make the elf girls happy, but also benefit the city. With a bold gaze, he finally agreed to their request, prompting the girls to lead him into a room. They explained that their lord's treasury held all the equipment that past heroes had donned. Seiji declined their offer to use the equipment, but his fears were confirmed as he realized how dangerous the two girls could be if left unsupervised. As they left the village of the elves and began their journey back to town, Seiji reflected on how quickly he had returned to the area. Ayana, with a bright blush on her face, remarked how amazing it was to witness the legendary confession of revenge firsthand. Yuffie, equally flushed, chimed in, expressing her honor to be part of the experience. The two girls excitedly discussed their next steps, declaring that once their quest was complete, they would march toward the royal capital to put their skills to use. Overhearing their plans, Seiji grew alarmed and cautioned them against taking such drastic actions. In his mind, he worried about the dangerous things they were considering. Despite his concerns, he knew that convincing them otherwise was unlikely. As they continued walking, one of the girls casually asked if 2 million glum was truly enough to secure his cooperation. Seiji's mind reeled at the thought of the massive reward. The girls added that their request would not harm anyone, emphasizing how merciful their mission was. Their assurance failed to ease his worries, but he decided to proceed. They insisted that all he had to do was complete a difficult task, showcasing his greatness to others. Seiji found their reasoning absurd but reluctantly agreed. He told himself that the task would not only pacify the two eccentric elves, but also contribute positively to the city. With their mission outlined, the girls led Seiji to the town's treasury, where they explained the significance of the equipment stored there. Seiji declined their offer to don the hero's gear, reinforcing his reluctance to involve himself too deeply in their plans. However, he was acutely aware of how dangerous the two could be if left to act on their own. As they prepared to leave the elves' village, Seiji resolved to ensure they would not cause harm to themselves or others. Returning to town, Seiji remarked how unexpected it was to be back so soon. Ayana and Yuffie, still blushing with excitement, expressed their amazement at being part of the legendary confession of revenge. They spoke animatedly about their plans, eager to demonstrate their skills in the royal capital. Seiji, listening to their enthusiastic chatter, felt a mix of apprehension and resignation. He resolved to see their plans through, hoping that doing so would prevent further chaos. For reasons that defy logic, Seiji had somehow become recognized as the king of the elves by a pair of elven sisters named Ayana and Yuffie. The stubbornness of these elves, coupled with their promise of wealth and grandeur, had led to a bizarre ritual they called the Confession of Revenge. This strange custom arose because the two sisters took issue with a girl named Faye, who had rejected their lord's heartfelt profession of love. They disparaged Faye, referring to her as trashy, and began discussing among themselves if this could truly be the legendary confession of revenge passed down in their elven lore. This sequence of events ultimately brought Seiji and the elves to the guild, where the two sisters attracted attention by chattering excitedly and flushing red with emotion. The excitement only escalated as they declared their intention to tackle dangerous quests to prove their king's greatness. They wanted to show the woman who had rejected their lord just how remarkable he truly was. This determination, paired with their enthusiasm, led Seiji to the guild once again, where he found himself taking on high-stakes missions. All Seiji wanted was a simple, medicinal herb collection quest, a quick task to complete before returning home. However, he never anticipated how much he would regret underestimating the fervor of the elves and their promises. Together, they ventured into the forest, where the two sisters immediately demonstrated their extraordinary skills. Upon reaching the forest, the two elven sisters confidently announced that the quest was already completed. They urged Seiji to leave the smaller tasks to them, standing before a defeated giant snake, its menacing form sprawled lifelessly behind them. With astonishing speed, they collected a massive bag of herbs and declared the herb-gathering quest finished as well. They assured Seiji that he need not concern himself with such mundane tasks, insisting it was their duty to support their king. Witnessing their efficiency left Seiji dumbfounded, his jaw dropping in disbelief. He silently acknowledged their eccentricity but admitted they could be unexpectedly helpful when needed. Though not exactly a compliment, he found himself thinking it would suffice. After completing all their tasks, Seiji suggested they return to the guild to turn in the results. The group left the forest and made their way back, where Seiji handed over the oversized bags filled with herbs and other quest-related items. As he finished reporting their accomplishments, the receptionist, Firna, approached him with an emotional expression. She surprised Seiji by asking if he would go out with her, a request so unexpected that his eyes widened in shock. It took him several moments to process what he had just heard. The two elven sisters, who had been listening intently, were equally taken aback. Seiji managed to ask Firna if she hadn't rejected him only days earlier, recalling the pain of that moment. Firna explained her feelings with sincerity, admitting she had been thinking about him constantly. She revealed her initial hesitations, confessing that she had worried about the challenges of living as adventurers and the constant focus on growing stronger to protect themselves. She expressed concern about the exhausting reality of worrying about survival every day. Seiji listened carefully, his expression softening as Firna poured out her thoughts. She admitted that seeing him take on such challenging quests had changed her perspective. She had decided that it might be possible for them to overcome such hardships together. With her face slightly flushed, Firna nodded shyly, affirming her feelings. Seiji responded with a light smile, but his next words carried unexpected weight. He gently told her that he was not the one who had completed the challenging tasks she admired so much. Instead, he credited the two elven sisters for their efforts, emphasizing that he was not as strong as she believed. He spoke with calm confidence, stating that he was not strong enough for her and respectfully declining her offer. Firna's face turned a deep shade of red as she processed his words, her embarrassment evident. She closed her eyes and replied quietly, expressing her understanding. The Fina girl smiled warmly and reminded him to remember that he would always be welcome there. He nodded and expressed how great that was, before inquiring if they could now receive the reward for the day's quest. Leaving the guild together, the two elf girls exchanged an exuberant high five. Aina turned to Yuffie and asked if she saw what had just happened, declaring that it was the long-awaited confession of revenge. Yuffie, filled with excitement, agreed wholeheartedly, shouting with glee that it was exactly right. Their cheers filled the air as they declared together how amazing Seiji was. Seiji, however, felt his heart racing, recalling the moment Farron had proposed to him earlier. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he glanced at the two elf girls still celebrating. He mentioned to them how he had initially thought they were finally behaving since they had been so quiet and composed inside the guild. Yet here they were, bursting with joy. He asked them to stop celebrating, emphasizing that this was not about revenge for being rejected, but rather a friendly competition. He urged them not to trouble Farron with their antics. The two girls, still beaming, raised their hands in salute, their faces slightly red, and assured him with bright smiles that they understood. He then reminded them not to pick fights with adventurers whenever their paths crossed. He recalled how the two often taunted adventurers who merely exchanged glances with them, calling them arrogant fools and telling them to know their place. Seiji had always been the one to intervene and stop them from escalating these unnecessary conflicts. The girls argued that it was inevitable since the adventurers failed to bow to their lord and deserved punishment. Seiji, growing more stern, warned them that if they started another unreasonable fight, he would send them back to the elf village. This threat caused the girls to pale, shouting that they did not want to be sent away and begging for his forgiveness with emotional faces. Seiji sighed and told them they were forgiven, but then he added that this would be their last quest together. The statement shocked the two girls, who immediately demanded to know what he meant. With a serious expression, Seiji explained that he was not doing quests to make money but to help out around the city. He mentioned that these herb-collecting quests could easily be handled by other adventurers who could not take on higher-ranking tasks. He added that he thought it was time to head home, which left the girls both shocked and relieved, realizing what he truly meant by calling this their last quest. Seiji then told them they should also return to their village. This announcement left the girls completely stunned, their eyes and mouths wide open in disbelief. They shouted at the top of their voices, asking what he was talking about, their minds seemingly overwhelmed by the unexpected news. Seiji, unperturbed, reminded them of their earlier agreement, pointing out that the deal was for him to complete the so-called confession of revenge. He didn't understand why they were so surprised, considering they had agreed to this beforehand. The two girls, visibly upset, bluntly responded that of course they were surprised when he suddenly said something so rude. Seiji calmly replied that he had been waiting his whole life for a slower, more peaceful existence, describing it as his version of the farming or carefree arc often sought after. The girls, with emotional faces, commented that they too would love a fluffy pet arc, showing how much they shared his yearning for simplicity. Observing their peculiar behavior, Seiji sighed internally, thinking to himself that they were being strange again. Finally, Seiji addressed them again, clarifying that all he wanted was a peaceful life in his hometown. The two elf girls threw a tantrum, swinging their arms vigorously and rolling on the ground, insisting they would not return to their village without him. They proclaimed their desire to lead an unrivaled, vibrant life alongside Seiji, and their behavior left him frustrated. He shouted at them to stop their nonsense immediately, but the two girls, with emotional expressions, declared that their purpose in life was to serve him. They even vowed that if ordered to end their lives, they would do so without hesitation. Seiji told them not to attempt to change the topic by acting so dramatically, closing his eyes in frustration. He let out a heavy sigh, expressing his discontent, but acknowledging that he had promised someone to take care of the girls. Admitting there was no going back, he finally relented. The elf girls, overjoyed upon hearing this, asked him if he was truly serious about keeping such a promise. They gushed about their excitement, thrilled that he would accompany them. He confirmed their assumptions, albeit with some reluctance, and shifted the conversation, asking if they could handle tasks like farming and building houses. The girls reassured him enthusiastically, reminding him that elves were children of the forest for a reason. They offered to lend a hand in any way he desired, promising to be reliable. Despite their confidence, Seiji, with a gloomy expression, thought to himself how frustrating it was that these two seemed capable of almost anything. The girls continued chatting excitedly with each other, marveling at how their wedding had been predicted and debating whether they should decide on wedding dresses that night. Their chatter annoyed Seiji, who snapped them out of it and reminded them to stay on track. He acknowledged their help, appreciating their efforts and agreeing to take them with him, provided they promised not to cause any trouble. The girls responded cheerfully, thanking him profusely with big smiles. They celebrated with each other, ecstatic that they were officially allowed to accompany their lord. They declared their involvement not only in the revenge arc, but also in the unrivaled arc, leaving Seiji confused. When he asked what they meant by these terms, they dismissed his question and suggested moving on to the next thing, leaving him bewildered. Seiji suddenly felt sleepy and noticed one of the girls offering him a cup of hot liquid with a scent that seemed to induce drowsiness. The two elf girls covered their noses with handkerchiefs to prevent themselves from succumbing to sleep. Despite his initial resistance, Seiji soon fell into darkness, completely overtaken by sleep. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in the bustling streets of a royal capital. The two elf girls supported him on both arms as he wobbled from the lingering effects of sleep. Looking around, Seiji saw the towering royal castle in the distance and quickly regained full consciousness. Confused and disoriented, he asked the girls why he was back in the capital. They explained that they had carried him there using a mikoshi, a portable shrine traditionally used for transport. Seiji, still trying to process the situation, questioned why they ignored his instructions to head to his hometown. The girls revealed that to achieve this journey, they burned an ancient herb passed down through their race. They explained that the herb's function was to relax and induce sleep. Seiji, still frustrated by their actions, commented inwardly that they had effectively attempted regicide in their own unique way. By the time they reached the castle's grand entrance, Aina Rindu and Yuffie Rose called out to a guard stationed nearby. They demanded he immediately deliver a message to the minister, informing him that the elven royalty, Aina Rindu and Yuffie Rose, had come to visit. The guard, initially startled, hesitated before rushing off to comply. Seiji stood by, baffled by the sudden turn of events, unable to understand why these two girls were taking such bold actions. They were promptly escorted inside, and as they walked through the ornate halls, Seiji asked why they had come here and what purpose their visit served. The two girls, with unwavering expressions, replied that there was someone within the castle who wished to meet Seiji personally. Moments later, they entered the throne room, where the king sat on his ornate throne. A nervous expression etched across his face. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead as he greeted the elven royalty, addressing them by their titles. His voice trembled slightly as he expressed his gratitude for their visit, bowing slightly as a sign of respect. The king then mentioned that the treaty meeting would take place later, but his speech was abruptly interrupted by Seiji, who had pieced together that these two had orchestrated the meeting without his knowledge. Seiji's outburst, filled with frustration, demanded an explanation for their audacity. The two girls, unfazed, called out to the king, addressing him directly. With steady voices, they made an extraordinary demand, stating that the king should abdicate the throne and appoint Seiji as the new ruler immediately. Seiji was struck speechless, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of their request. The king, equally stunned, asked for clarification, barely able to comprehend what he had just heard. Aina and Yuffie, however, stood their ground, calmly asserting that Seiji, as the king of elves, was also destined to be the human king. They turned to Seiji, insisting that it was imperative for him to accept this role for the betterment of both kingdoms. Seiji, still reeling from the situation, responded that their way of thinking was completely outlandish. Meanwhile, the king asked the girls if they were genuinely serious about their request. Their expressions remained blank as they questioned whether the king truly intended to hold on to the throne. The room grew tense as the two girls closed their eyes, a brilliant magical aura emanating from their forms. They acknowledged the king's resistance but warned him that his actions could be interpreted as an act of war. They emphasized their desire for a peaceful agreement, though their words carried an underlying threat. Seiji, trying to process the gravity of the situation, casually remarked that their antics were likely to get them all executed. The king, visibly panicking, fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he held his head in frustration. His voice rose in desperation, proclaiming that no matter how many soldiers his country could muster, it would be useless. He admitted that a war with the elves would lead to the kingdom's annihilation within 3 days. Seiji, hearing this, was shocked and questioned whether the kingdom could truly fall so quickly. The king, still on his knees, raised his face, a look of despair shadowing his features. The king humbly asked for forgiveness for his earlier behavior and requested the boy's name. Aina and Yuffie, their faces stern, interjected, asking if the king was finally acknowledging their lord. They introduced Seiji, declaring him the current king of the elves and revealing his true identity to the bewildered king. Seiji, attempting to diffuse the tension, apologized to the king for the disrespect shown by the two girls earlier. The king, adorned with his crown, bowed deeply, lowering his head to the ground in a gesture of submission. Still on his knees with his hands pressed firmly against the floor, he admitted that the authority of the elven king surpassed that of human royalty. He urged Seiji to feel free to act as he deemed fit, recognizing his superior position. Seiji approached the king with a composed demeanor, even as his heart raced. The king, his expression solemn, removed his crown with a steady hand and lowered his gaze. Seiji, stunned by the act, asked what the king meant by calling him a hero. The two elven girls by his side quickly reassured him, stating that it was nothing out of the ordinary. They explained that Seiji's ancestors were considered heroes of the land, recounting how Seiya, an elven warrior, had led their race to defeat the demon king, who had sought to dominate both humans and elves. They continued, describing how Seiya, with a heroic heart, refused to stop fighting even when it meant sacrificing everything to protect humanity. This act of courage had deeply moved the elven people, who grew emotional as they cherished the memory of Seiya's compassion. Seiji listened in astonishment, wondering to himself if the elven race, known for their pride and fierceness, could really be so honorable. The king affirmed the story, his voice heavy with emotion, adding that humanity would not have endured without Seiya's efforts. Seiji felt a wave of pride for his ancestor, silently acknowledging the profound legacy that had been left behind. The king, with a sad expression, expressed his awareness of the consequences of defying such a powerful race and began to step forward with the crown. Declaring that the throne rightfully belonged to the hero's descendant, the king made a gesture to place the crown on Seiji's head. Seiji froze, overwhelmed by the sight before him. Panic set in as he implored the king not to relinquish the throne so easily. After taking a moment to calm himself, he explained that he was unfit to rule this country and gestured towards the elven girls, stating that technically, he was their leader. Turning to the girls, he told them they were bound to obey him. The two girls exchanged glances before commenting on his humility, remarking on how the entire world seemed to be within his grasp, yet he remained so modest. The girls reminded Seiji that they could not return to their homeland empty-handed, as it would be a disgrace to the elves. Seiji sighed, remarking on how troublesome they were. The king, determined to show gratitude, suggested granting Seiji the title of Grand Duke, along with ownership of the territory where he resided. Seiji, firm in his refusal, declined any form of status or land. The elven girls watched with curiosity, wondering aloud what was wrong with their master. The king, however, was relentless. Seeking to honor Seiji's contribution, he proposed a lifetime exemption from taxes on all crops Seiji harvested. This offer made Seiji pause, and he reflected on how the proposal had shifted from national power to personal benefits. Though hesitant, he acknowledged that such an offer was extraordinary and ultimately accepted it. The elven girls erupted with joy, celebrating the agreement. They enthusiastically declared that a deal had been struck, and Seiji's homeland had now gained an additional territorial status. The king, visibly relieved, asked if they were satisfied with his offer. The girls nodded, expressing their intention to share the heroic tale of Seiji's deeds with their village. They emphasized that the legend of their new leader must be recorded for future generations. Seiji could only watch them with a tired expression as they excitedly planned to spread the story. The king, addressing Seiji formally, moved closer to him and took his hand, tears streaming down his face as he expressed profound gratitude for Seiji's care for the country. Later that evening, Seiji was seen soaking in a bath, commenting to himself on how blissful it felt to have a moment of peace. He thought about how fortunate he was to have been allowed to stay in the royal capital for the night. His thoughts were interrupted when Aina and Yuffie barged in, offering to scrub his back. He turned them down with a blank expression, causing the girls to remark on his dissatisfied demeanor. They entered the bath regardless, noting how spacious it was, large enough to accommodate the three of them. Seiji, uncomfortable with their presence, asked if they could leave. The girls, however, thanked him sincerely for all his hard work and expressed their happiness about reaching the royal capital. They mentioned their plans to return to Seiji's hometown to begin a peaceful life of farming. Seiji responded that he simply wanted to live a quiet life, which prompted the girls to tease him, implying that he wanted to spend such a life with them. This caused Seiji to lose his temper, and he promptly sent them out in frustration. Realizing they had gone too far, the girls bowed deeply, apologizing for their jokes. The king, who had been observing the scene, was struck with shock and awe at the control Seiji seemed to have over the elves. He silently resolved to entrust the future of the country to this unlikely hero. Meanwhile, in Seiji's hometown, the cheerful sight of small animals roaming freely painted a serene picture of the quiet life he so deeply desired. After saving the elves, Seiji returned home as an overlord, carrying the weight of his experiences and the burden of PTSD. He managed to push through his struggles and finally arrived at his hometown, filled with excitement. The sight of familiar surroundings brought a wave of relief as he whispered to himself that there truly was no place like home. As he stood there, taking in the peaceful scenery, he began to wonder how his crops were faring, eager to resume his quiet farming life. The thoughts of fresh soil and growing plants filled his mind with joy, inspiring a renewed sense of purpose. While working on his farm, Seiji's tranquility was interrupted by the faint sound of a whimper. The cry was unmistakably from an animal in distress. Driven by curiosity and concern, he traced the sound, moving cautiously through the dense forest. His path led him to a small box, nestled among the leaves, and inside, he saw a tiny creature with sad, pleading eyes. The animal looked like a puppy, and its gaze struck a deep chord in Seiji's heart. His thoughts raced as he wondered who could have abandoned such a helpless little one in this desolate place. The puppy's forlorn expression reminded him of the time the two elf girls had used their wide-eyed charm to seek his help. As Seiji approached the box, the small creature seemed to sense his presence. It struggled to free itself, shaking the box with all its might until one side finally broke open. The puppy stumbled out, its tiny legs trembling with each step as it moved closer to Seiji. Its eyes, still filled with sadness, glimmered with a faint hope, drawing Seiji further in. Watching the puppy's efforts filled him with a sense of warmth and happiness that was hard to describe. His face lit up with excitement, and his heart swelled with determination to care for the little one. Over the next few days, Seiji and the puppy, now named Sasuke, began to form a close bond. The puppy's energy grew with every passing day, and they often played games together in the forest. Seiji enjoyed tossing a plate into the distance, watching Sasuke run after it with surprising agility. Though small when Seiji first found him, Sasuke seemed to have grown quickly, impressing Seiji with his speed and skill. Each time Sasuke returned the plate, his joyful expression brought a wide smile to Seiji's face. The playful moments between them were filled with laughter and happiness, a stark contrast to the battles and challenges Seiji had endured as an overlord. One day, as Seiji played fetch with Sasuke, the two elf girls from his past arrived unexpectedly. Their faces immediately turned pale, and their eyes widened in shock as they saw the creature by Seiji's side. They stared at Sasuke, unable to hide their fear, before nervously trying to explain that his new pet was not an ordinary dog. They claimed that Sasuke was a death Fenrir, a fearsome beast known as the King of Monsters. Their voices trembled as they begged Seiji to reconsider keeping such a dangerous creature as his companion. Despite their warnings, Seiji continued to enjoy his time with Sasuke, observing the puppy's playful nature and harmless demeanor. He found it hard to believe the elves' claims, brushing off their concerns with a calm demeanor. Sasuke, wagging his tail and panting like any other dog, seemed oblivious to the commotion. The puppy's bright eyes and cheerful behavior only strengthened Seiji's belief that the elves were exaggerating. As Sasuke eagerly fetched the plate once more, Seiji admired his speed and precision, commenting to himself how remarkable the puppy's abilities were. The elf girls, still trembling with fear, asked Seiji if he had noticed Sasuke's unusually large size. They pointed out that no ordinary puppy could grow so big in such a short time. Seiji looked at them in disbelief, patting Sasuke's head as he chuckled softly at their panic. To him, Sasuke looked no different from a regular dog, his adorable features making it impossible to see him as a monster. The puppy nuzzled against Seiji's hand, reinforcing the bond they had built over their short time together. Seiji ran his hand gently over Sasuke's soft fur, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The elf girls continued to insist that Sasuke was a death Fenrir, but Seiji's trust in his loyal companion remained unwavering. Sasuke, sitting contentedly by Seiji's side, seemed to smile back at him, sharing in the quiet joy of the moment. Seiji reassured the elf girls that Sasuke was just a big dog, nothing more, and began playing with his massive companion to prove his harmlessness. He hugged the enormous creature, rubbing his face against the soft fur on Sasuke's head, marveling at how clever and affectionate the dog was. The elf girls, watching this display, were shocked at their lord's behavior. They remained convinced that the creature was dangerous, muttering under their breaths about Sasuke being a threat. More than the potential danger, they seemed irritated and jealous that the dog was receiving so much affection from their lord. The veins on their foreheads bulged as they whispered to each other, cursing Sasuke for being a bastard. They questioned how a creature like this could hold their master's attention so easily. Their irritation grew as Seiji continued playing with Sasuke, calling him cute and his baby. The elf girls were baffled, unable to comprehend their lord's attachment to what they believed to be a deadly beast. Despite their repeated warnings, Seiji remained unconvinced. They tried again, explaining that Sasuke's strength rivaled their own as elves, and insisted that the creature Seiji believed to be a dog was actually a grim reaper of the forest. They asked him why he was being so stubborn about it, but Seiji only smiled and told them he was a dog person. He added that he had trained Sasuke himself and asked if they wanted to see a demonstration. Seiji began giving Sasuke commands to prove his point. At his signal, Sasuke sat obediently, and when instructed, he lifted a paw to offer a handshake. Next, Seiji commanded Sasuke to salute, and the enormous dog rose on his hind legs, raising one paw to his head in an impressive gesture. Sasuke executed the commands with a proud smile, and the elf girls were left speechless. They were in awe, muttering that it should not be possible for a creature like Sasuke to perform such tasks. They remarked on his bone structure, pointing out how it seemed impossible for him to move this way. Seiji dismissed their amazement, teasing that their observations were simply a product of their overactive imaginations. Sasuke, clearly enjoying the attention, leaned in to hug Seiji, licking his face affectionately. The elf girls watched in horror as their lord allowed the dog to shower him with affection. Their faces twisted in disbelief as they muttered to themselves about their jealousy. They lamented how things had come to this, unable to comprehend how their lord could adore such a creature so openly. They approached Seiji, pleading with him to train them too, insisting they could act like dogs if that was what it took to earn his affection. Seiji, taken aback by their strange reaction, sternly told them to leave him alone. The elf girls became visibly gloomy after being dismissed. Despite their departure, Seiji continued to rub his face against Sasuke's fur, clearly unbothered by their judgment. Sasuke had grown significantly larger over time, now towering over Seiji by several sizes. The elf girls, Ain and Yuffie, observed this development and could not hold back their comments. They reminded Seiji to look at the creature carefully, urging him to finally accept that this was not a mere dog. They pointed out that in just a month, Sasuke had grown to nearly 3 or 4 times his original size, a clear indication that he was no ordinary animal. As Seiji patted Sasuke's head, his expression turned gloomy. He finally admitted that perhaps the elf girls were right all along. Ain and Yuffie, hearing this admission, asked cautiously if their lord was finally acknowledging what they had been saying about the creature he believed to be a dog. Seiji suddenly burst into laughter, clearly enjoying himself as he teased the 2 elf girls. He playfully asked if they truly believed that Sasuke was a death Fenrir, wondering if they had been discussing that very thing all along. A bright smile spread across Seiji's face, and with a glint in his eye, he commented that he believed Sasuke was simply a large breed of dog. He flashed a grin at Ain and Yuffie before continuing, explaining that Sasuke had recently started hunting for his own food. Seiji then began rubbing Sasuke's fur affectionately, calling him a good boy. Sasuke, sitting contentedly by his side, responded with a big happy woof, a sign of agreement to his master's praise. The 2 elf girls, still unconvinced, continued to insist that Sasuke was no ordinary creature. They argued that Sasuke was at the top of the food chain, far more powerful than even the fiercest of evil monkeys. Despite their warnings, Seiji simply ignored them. His mind was elsewhere as he marveled at the impressive quality of Sasuke's fur. He even mused to himself, wondering if Sasuke might actually win in a contest if they ever entered one together. The thought seemed amusing to Seiji, and for a moment, he was lost in the idea of his beloved companion participating in some kind of competition. Ain and Yuffie, frustrated by Seiji's casual dismissal of their concerns, shouted in shock. They asked if their lord realized what he was suggesting by bringing up a contest. Were they truly supposed to believe that Sasuke could handle such a dangerous event? A contest that could turn into a nightmarish battle of chaos and suffering? Seiji, however, seemed completely unbothered. He patted Sasuke's head and told him that they would be going out for a bit of pheasant shooting. For the men of this world, pheasant shooting was the masculine equivalent of picking flowers, and Seiji seemed to find it quite fitting. He turned to Sasuke and told him to play with the 2 elf girls while he was gone. Seiji had no intention of worrying about the argument for now. As he left for his shooting, Ain and Yuffie were left standing in stunned silence. They could hardly believe what had just happened. They had been treated worse than a dog, and their lord was showing this creature, Sasuke, more affection than he had ever shown them. They muttered to themselves, their frustration bubbling to the surface. It was rough. It was unthinkable. As Seiji walked away, his mind still occupied with thoughts of the pheasant hunt, the dog and the 2 elf girls stared each other down. The atmosphere grew tense, and the 3 of them locked eyes, all sensing an unspoken challenge in the air. The tension was palpable, and as soon as Seiji was out of sight, a stern silence fell upon them. Aeon was the first to speak, quietly asking Yuffie if she was thinking what she thought she was thinking. The implication hung heavy in the air, as Ain suggested that they needed to put a stop to this before it got out of hand. They had to make Sasuke understand that no creature, especially one who looked like a dog, could claim the position of favor with their lord. Yuffie agreed with Ain, though her tone was calm but filled with determination. They would fight for the safety of their king and for the peace of their race, she assured Ain. It was certainly not out of jealousy or envy, she explained, but because their lord was clearly in danger. Sasuke's behavior had to be questioned. They couldn't just let this creature, this so-called dog, have free rein to dominate their lord's attention. Just then, Sasuke, who had been lounging lazily until now, suddenly stood up. He let out a loud, menacing growl that seemed directed at the two elf girls. His posture was aggressive, and the way he stared at them made it clear that he was prepared for a fight. It was as if Sasuke was sensing the brewing tension. And in that moment, both Ain and Yuffie realized that the situation had escalated far beyond what they had anticipated. Sasuke was ready to defend himself, and it appeared as though a confrontation was inevitable. As the two elf girls and Sasuke faced off, the air around them seemed to crackle with tension. They exchanged hard stares, sizing each other up as if preparing for a battle. The growling dog and the fierce elf girls were like opposing forces, each aware of the power and danger the other could wield. Just as they were about to engage in the first round of their fight, they heard a familiar voice calling from a distance. Seiji was back, running toward them with a wide smile on his face, as though nothing had happened. He casually asked if Sasuke had been a good boy while he was gone. Sasuke, who had been giving off a menacing growl, instantly stopped and whined. The shift in Sasuke's demeanor was stark. From being ready to confront the two elves, Sasuke now seemed almost embarrassed by his earlier behavior. As Seiji approached, he noticed Sasuke's disheveled state and asked what had happened while he was away. Seiji turned to the elf girls and playfully asked if they had started the trouble, calling it unfair. Sasuke, sitting obediently now, shook his head and gave a small smile, as though understanding the situation had been defused, at least for now. The atmosphere softened as Seiji patted Sasuke's head, his face filled with amusement at the situation. The two elf girls, meanwhile, stood quietly, clearly unsure of how to respond to their lord's complete disregard for their concerns. It was clear that Sasuke's place in Seiji's life wasn't going to be questioned anytime soon. The two elf girls could only watch in disbelief as their lord continued to dote on the creature they believed to be a threat. They exchanged shocked glances, unsure of how to react to Seiji's actions. One of the girls, her face a mixture of confusion and concern, spoke up. She begged their lord to stop and look at the state of them. Both of the elf girls, bruised and battered, were in no better shape than Sasuke, and they felt that it was far past time to stop seeing the creature as a mere dog. They insisted it was not a dog at all, but a terrifying monster, a ferocious creature worthy of its title as the king of monsters. Despite their protests, Seiji seemed unfazed. His focus remained on Sasuke, and he spoke to the two girls in a way that made them feel both baffled and defeated. He appreciated their efforts to play with Sasuke, but warned them that if they continued to treat the creature unfairly, he would have no choice but to ask the elven leader to replace them with others. The two girls froze, their faces filled with horror at the mere suggestion. They had heard rumors about the elven leadership, but to hear it from Seiji himself was something they hadn't anticipated. Seiji casually explained that he had been exchanging letters with the elven leader, and when asked since when this had been happening, he simply shrugged, as if it were a trivial matter. The two elf girls, now realizing the magnitude of the situation, grew uneasy. They knew that the world of elves was a harsh and unforgiving place, where the laws of nature reigned supreme. Even the royal family was not exempt from the intense competition that fueled the land of elves. The girls were acutely aware of the stakes, and they feared that Seiji's actions could have unforeseen consequences. In an attempt to placate their lord, the girls pleaded with him not to do anything hasty. They began to sweat, their nervousness becoming more evident with each passing second. Their faces twisted into strained smiles, and they assured Seiji that they had simply enjoyed playing with Sasuke. They wanted to end the conversation on a lighter note, making it clear that there were no misunderstandings between them and the dog, despite the tension that had been building. Seiji, who had been eyeing them with an expression of mild disbelief, paused for a moment. He asked them if that was truly the case, and with a slight apology, he admitted that he might have been too quick to doubt them. Despite his earlier reservations, he smiled at the girls and reiterated that they were essentially his companions when it came to Sasuke. He asked them once again to please try and get along with the creature. It was an odd request, considering the circumstances, but Seiji seemed genuinely invested in making sure his two companions didn't feel alienated by Sasuke's presence. The two elf girls, though clearly irritated, tried to hide their frustration. Their faces were still twisted in discomfort, their eyes betraying their feelings of resentment. The smile they forced upon themselves looked strained, and they felt a simmering anger that was difficult to suppress. They had been humiliated, and their pride had been wounded. Despite this, they replied that they would take Seiji's advice to heart. But it was clear to anyone watching that they were not happy with the situation. Their bodies were tense, their fists clenched, and their eyes narrowed in silent defiance. As the moment passed, both of the elf girls finally agreed to acknowledge Sasuke as their rival. The monster, Seiji's sworn companion and the elf's sworn enemy, was now an undeniable presence in their lives. They understood that Sasuke was not merely a dog. It was a powerful creature that had earned its place in Seiji's world. The girls, however, could not forget that this creature was also their enemy. Unknown to Seiji, Sasuke's connection to him would forever tie the two elves in a strange, ongoing rivalry that would only grow more intense over time. In the meantime, Seiji seemed unaware of the underlying tension between the two girls and Sasuke. He lay down on Sasuke's back, using the creature's fur as a makeshift pillow, completely at ease in the moment. Sasuke, ever loyal, relaxed under his master's weight, remaining still as Seiji drifted into a comfortable position. The two elf girls, still angry and resentful, stood at a distance, their minds swirling with thoughts of revenge. They had been forced to submit to Seiji's wishes, but the fire of rebellion burned bright in their hearts and faces. As Seiji and Sasuke lay together, a picture of calmness and serenity, the two elf girls could not help but feel the weight of their defeat, and they made themselves scarce.